Hello and welcome to this tutorial. My name is Anniken and normally I'm in the southwest of England, but today I'm in Spain. I'm on the Aruela Costa, on the southern Costa Blanca in the Valencia region of Spain. And as I'm away, the setup for today's tutorial is a little bit different. I didn't have my normal lights and normal background, so I hope you can still see and hear everything okay. A few days ago I was on the beach and I was knitting along and I'd forgotten the waist yarn for my afterthought heel. When you do an afterthought heel, the easiest way to do it is to put in a waist yarn or knit in a waist yarn when you get to where you want the heel to be. I was knitting on the beach and I'd forgotten to bring that waist yarn with me. So I just put a marker in and carried on knitting, and then last night I sat down and cut my knitting, cut the stitch in the middle of the row, and then I unpicked those stitches that I needed for the afterthought heel, and I filmed how I did it, so I'm going to show you how I did that now. I do hope the sound and the picture quality is okay. Apologies if it's not as good as normal, but I do hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and do consider subscribing if you haven't already, and if you have any questions, please ask below this video. These socks are knitted using my Aventuras pattern, which has an afterthought heel, and normally when I do the afterthought heel I knit in a waist yarn when I get to the heel. So here where you got that white marker, I'll knit in a piece of waist yarn, and then when I come to want to do the afterthought heel, I unpick that waist yarn and then I knit the heel, which is this one. It looks weird when it's like that, but it looks very good when it's on your feet. I'll put the links to everything I talked about below this video, including this yarn, which is Dragon Hill Studio. But I was knitting these on the beach and I didn't have any waist yarn with me when I got to the heel on the first sock. So I decided to do still do an afterthought heel, but do them without the waist yarn, which is a little bit more difficult, but it's not impossible. And in this video I'm going to show you how I do it when I don't use the waist yarn. I'm currently in Spain, so I'm recording this video outside because the light here is better, but I apologize for the dark background, and I also apologize if you hear any noise. It's fairly quiet now, so I'm hoping this will be okay, but I'm not at home at the moment. I wanted to get this done and I thought it'd be a good chance to actually record a little tutorial. So so I've already done the second sock. This was actually the first sock that I did, and what I decided to do was to put a marker in the middle of the row, so I can see which row it is, because this is stocking stitch for the foot and this is rib for the leg. So I didn't really need the marker, but I thought that made sense. It just makes it a bit easier. And the other thing I did, so for the front of the foot it's rib. So, and I know that I had one stitch, the rib ended on one stitch here and it started on one knit stitch there. So it's knit one, then purl two, knit two, purl two at the end, and then knit one right at the end. So I know when I unpick this, I should have one knit stitch left before those two purl stitches, but just to make it easier, I actually put these markers in at the side, on that side and on that side, because that just makes it easier. If you're doing stocking stitch, I definitely recommend putting in the markers at the side. Thing is, if you're doing a wedge heel, this is my modified wedge heel from my Aventuras pattern. If you're doing a wedge heel, you want the if you're doing a wedge toe, you want the heel to match in line with the toe. So you can't, if the toe is like that, you don't want the heel to come out, say here, because then it wouldn't match the toe. And if you're doing stocking stitch all the way around, it can be difficult to work out what is the center that lines up with the center of the toe, and what how far to pick up on either side if you don't know what your center stitch is. If you know what your center stitch is, then it's okay. So what I decided to do is I put a marker in here so I know which stitch to cut, and that stitch is in stitch number 16. I had 32 stitches, so I put it in stitch number 16. So let me show you how I do this. I was also lucky because that row, which would have been the row where I would have knitted in the waist yarn, is actually a purple row. On my other sock it was actually a red one, and you can see here I've got 2 rows of red and 1 of pink. The red and the pink kind of runs into each other, so if I got like a yellow or a purple, that's better because then I only have 1 row. So let me show you how to do this. I'm actually going to, no, I'm going to leave that in for now. So you need your knitting needle. Now you can start at the edge here, but it's probably easier, especially if you don't have self-striping yarn like this, to start in the middle. So I'll show you how to start in the middle. But you can, if you know which row you're unpicking, and for me it's, my needle's got to go into that pink row below the purple, you can start at the edge here. On the other sock, because it was the pink and the red 3 rows, I actually started here and I picked up that way, and then I went back, pulled my needle through to the other end, and then picked up the other way. If you're not using a circular needle, then I recommend you use a double pointed needle. For this, because I think it'll be a little bit quicker, I'm actually going to start and pick up from this side. So that is my marker. So I know I'm going to pick up, because I'm going to undo the purple yarn, I'm going to pick up with the pink yarn here. So I'm going to go, each stitch has 2 strands and it forms a V. So I'm going to pick up all the right hand legs. So each stitch has 2 legs, and I'm going to pick up all the right hand legs, right side legs. So I can pick up that one. I can't pick up that one because that's the other leg of the same stitch. So I leave that next leg, I pick up that leg, I leave the next leg and I pick up that leg. So it's every other leg. So just look very careful when you're doing this. And I'm going to go all the way along here, and also make sure, because you do have fabric on the other side, just make sure that you don't actually pick up right through, and you actually pick up the front as well, because I've done that before and that gets a little bit difficult. So just be careful that you're separating the 2 layers of fabric. That one. And you also have to be prepared for the fact that you might miss the occasional leg. I did when I picked up for the other sock. I missed a couple, I think. But I discovered it when I knitted across, so it wasn't a problem. And it is really easy when you have this self-striping yarn and the color changes, because it's easy to see which row I'm going to pick up. If it was all the same color, then it's a little bit more difficult to make sure you stay in a straight row. It's very easy to accidentally kind of veer off course and end up like suddenly going into a row below or above. Okay, so I'm nearly there now. Now I'm quite used to picking up stitches, so that's why I'm doing this fairly quickly. So that's where my marker is. That is the last stitch. So the socks were knitted from the top, so in that direction. So I know that on this side, because it was knitted that direction from toe up, I should have 32 stitches here, and on the top, when I pick up the other side of that purple row, I'm actually picking up the stitches I'm picking up are actually the strands that go between the purple stitches, so I end up with 1 stitch left. So I know here I should have 32. So I'm just going to count quickly. So I got 32 stitches there, so that's good. I know that that's correct. Okay, so you can cut it and pick up the top ones as you're unraveling, but I think it's easier to pick both up. So if you do some double pointed needles, you would use another double pointed needles for these top stitches. Because I'm using circular needles, I've just pulled these stitches onto the cable, then I'm using the other circular needle to do these top stitches. You can do it in the same direction, or you can turn it around and use this one and go in that direction. Doesn't really make any difference. So I'm going to go straight back over here, and that blue one there is the first one. It's a little bit more difficult. Hang on. I'm going to just have to take my glasses off. I've got varifocals, but sometimes I do struggle to see really close up. Actually, let me have a look and see if it's easier to do it this way. So I flick them over. Yes, this is going to be easier, I think, for me. So this is the cast off edge up here. So I flick them over, and I think this is going to be easier for me. So that's where I start. So I'm going to go into that stitch, that one. So I'm not doing the purple. So here I got blue above the purple. So I'm going into all the blue stitches. And what I did was the row that was the equivalent of the waste yarn is the purple, and then on the next round I knitted another round before I started doing the rib, because it just makes it easier to pick up if the row I'm picking up is all knit stitches rather than post stitches. So again, I'm picking up every other stitch. Oh, hang on, can you see here? I've got blue stitches here, and then suddenly I've gone one row down into the purple. And that's wrong, because that's the row I want to actually cut. So undo those and start again. And this time the rows you're picking up on this side are actually the strands that go between the row of purple stitches, which does make it a little bit more difficult. So you've got to be careful, because when you actually start knitting this, you may find, like I did, that I've missed a couple of stitches. And again, I don't know whether you can see that when I did that last stitch, but there's a little bit of red that just suddenly poked through, and that was because I picked up the strand from the other side, or nearly picked up a strand from the other side. So you just got to be very careful. Okay. You could put your hand inside through the top of the sock, but I don't know if that'd be very easy to make sure you don't pick up. So you just got to every so often just pull the sock out, the other layer of sock out for the front, just to make sure you're not picking that up. It does feel quite tight when you do this. If you're picking up on double point needles, you will have a needle through here, and it'll make it feel a bit tighter because the needle will be thicker than the cable of a circular needle. So if you have circular needles, I recommend using them. You could also use needles that are a size smaller, or even 2 sizes smaller than the ones you're knitting with. I wouldn't use needles that are bigger. But if you're knitting socks on, say, 2.5mm needles, you may not have anything smaller than that. Okay, so I'm nearly there now. Okay, there. I think that's it. So let me just count them. So I should have 31 stitches. So I've actually got 32 there. So I think I maybe have gone one stitch too far out on this side, but I'm going to leave that for now. And then I'm going to start cutting and unpicking. So you don't want to cut on the side here, because if you cut on the side here and then unravel that purple row, you can end up with no tail on this side, which means that it'll start to unravel around the front. So you won't really want to cut the stitch in the middle, so that you can unpick to that side, and then you'll have a tail here, then you can unpick to that side, and then you have a tail here, and then you will get a third tail whichever side you join in to knit the next round, the first round of the heel. So you will end up with one tail on one side, 2 tails on the other side, but that's fine. The advantage of having a tail on each side is that if you get a gap, you can close it up quite easily. So just work out where you're going to cut. So I'm going to cut the purple strand, and I'm cutting the stitch that I got the marker in. Small scissors are best. Then I'm going to take that marker out, and then I'm going to just use a sewing needle to unpick this because it's easier. You can use a spare knitting needle if you want to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in one direction And you have to be a bit careful with this to make sure, if you find that it catches or anything, so you've knitted it, you've split the yarn when you knitted it or something, you've got to be a bit careful. You don't really want to cut this because you want that tail on this side to weave in later, just to secure the rest of your knitting so it doesn't start to unravel around the front or anything. So you can see I'm starting to get an opening there now. So you can see there now I'm getting a hole. So I'm nearly there now. Just take this bit nice and slow. If you put in your needles correctly, it's not a problem. Just keep an eye as you're doing it to make sure you don't have any drop stitches. So if you look here, I don't know if you can see that. That stitch on the cable there is green. It should be blue. So I've just unraveled. If I look, there's a bit of a loop here, so I've just unraveled one stitch down. But I got the green stitch, which is the row below. So when I knit it, I just have to watch out for that and pick up that green stitch, that blue stitch, sorry. So that's not a problem. If you do find that you have a loose loop that you've forgotten to pick up, it's helpful if you've got any of these kind of stitch markers or a spare piece of yarn that you can just thread through and secure it till you can fix it properly. Nearly there on this side, and I think this is one thing you have to be a bit careful about, is to make sure you don't go too far out. So that's why I put this marker in. So that's my last knit stitch on or first knit stitch, last knit stitch from the front there. That's where that is. So that pink stitch there belongs to the back. So I'm going to go out like that, and that's it on that side. Oh, I need to, that purple yarn is still going through the blue stitch, so we've got to undo that. So that's it. So you can see the purple yarn doesn't go through that blue stitch or that pink stitch. So that's correct, and that tail is perfect. When I finish the sock, I can weave that in. And then we go back to the middle. Now we're going to go in the other direction. And if you have picked up one stitch too many and you end up with extra stitch, doesn't matter. As you knit the first round, I always pick up a couple extra stitches on this side, one for that needle and one for that needle, and the same on that side, just to close up any gaps that you may get. And then on the next round, so the second round, I just decrease any extra stitches. So if you accidentally end up with 32 on one side and 32 on the other side instead of 31, when you do your second round to decrease, you just decrease an extra stitch, so you get back down to the number of stitches you should have, which in my case is 32. So a bit easier to pick up and undo on this side. Oh, something happened there. Let's have a look. So I don't want to break this yarn. Normally if I'm unpicking something and it gets a bit tangled like that, I tend to just break it, but I don't want to do that because I want to be able to weave in the end. There we go. So some people like to use this technique on every pair of socks rather than using a piece of waste yarn. I find using a piece of waste yarn much easier, and sometimes if I've been knitting socks out and about and I haven't had a piece of waste yarn with me, what I have done is I've just pulled some yarn from the center of the ball. I always knit from the outside of the ball, so sometimes I've just pulled a piece of yarn from the center, or if you knit from the center you can pull from the outside. But when I was doing this on the beach, I thought, if I don't do that, that would be a chance to do another tutorial. But I didn't want to wait another 2 weeks till I'm back in the UK to film this tutorial, so I thought I would just try and do it here and hope that it turns out okay. So I do apologize that this isn't up to my normal standard. I don't have my lights or anything like that, but hopefully you can see what I'm doing. So nearly there now. Hang on, needles are getting a bit in the way. There we go. So we are nearly there now. So remember I said I thought I went 1 stitch too far over on the top bit. So this side is okay. So I'll do that one. And that one. And that one. That one, there we go. So you can see I got that blue marker there, so that pink stitch is correct. Let's just check on this side. Okay, so I think that blue stitch should not be part of this. Let me just double check. 2, 4, 6, 8, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30. Okay, so I'm going to take that blue stitch off. There we go. So that blue stitch is part of the front. You can see that's how it ends up. So at the end I can just weave in that end. So I've now got, oops, apologies, I've now got 32 stitches here because that was the direction I knitted in from the toe up, and then I got 31 stitches here. So when I knit the first round I pick up, well actually let me show you. Okay, so I'm going to take these markers off the side out because I don't need them anymore, and then I'm going to join in the yarn here. I'm going to pull these tails. I'm going to put my hand down the cuff of this so I can pull these tails out, just so they're out of the way, because then that makes it easier, I think. Let's do the other one as well. There we go. Okay, and then I'm going to join in some new yarn. So we're going to take the tail. I like quite long tails because then I can weave them in and then just trim off the excess. So I'm going to pull that tail through. Now it doesn't matter if you start on this side where it's stocking stitch or on the rib side, really doesn't matter. Just start wherever you end up. Apologies for the camera moving around a bit. I'm using a selfie stick, so it's a little bit difficult. So to avoid getting a hole here, what I do is I pick up a stitch here before I start knitting. So I knit continental style, but this works the same way if you knit English style. So what you want to do is you don't want to pick up a loop like that, because you'll end up with a big hole even if you knit it through the back loop. You want to go through the fabric and you want to look, if you pull it, you can see whether you end up with a big hole or not. So I'm going to try and go in there. Hang on, let me hold the needles. There we go. So you just go in, you wrap the yarn around. So if you do it English style, you just wrap the yarn around. For the first one, what you could do is just loop the yarn around like that. There you go, and pull it through. Okay, I'm going to pull that because the tail is quite long, so I'm going to just pull this through a bit so the tail is about the length of my cuff. You can make the tail shorter if you want to. And then I'm going to just knit. So as I'm knitting, I'm just being very careful to make sure I check that I haven't dropped any stitches or missed any stitches or anything like that. Then when I get to about the middle, what I do is I put a marker into the last stitch on the row below. So I'm doing it on the left side because I haven't knitted that yet. So into the last stitch below the needle, I'm putting that marker in so that if I forget to use a row counter, I can count how many rounds I've done of this heel. Okay, and then this marker at the side here, we can take that out. We don't need that anymore. And then I'm going to pick up a stitch here. So you got that purple stitch, which is a little bit loose. Don't worry about that. So I'm going to pick up a stitch here. So you want to go a little bit in, at least one stitch or a little bit more, stitch and a half in. Just want to go in somewhere, wrap the yarn around the needle just like you're knitting. Now can you see that that ends up a little bit big? Might be okay actually. Just move it and try one more. Yeah, I'm happy. No, I'm not happy with that. Right, let's just... I'm not too worried if I end up with a tiny bit of a hole here, because I am going to weave in that end later, so it doesn't matter too much. Okay, so I'm going to do that. That looks better. Purple is going to be loose because that's the tail from where I picked, so that's fine. Then I'm going to change my needle service. I picked up an extra stitch at the beginning and the end of that row. So instead of 32 stitches, I'll have 34. And then I'll do the same thing on this side. So I'm going to pick up an extra stitch here. See, that ends up a little bit loose. But it might be okay once that tightens. Yeah, I'm going to stick with that because I think once I've tightened that purple yarn, it'll be fine. And then on this side, depending on how you pick up the stitches, they may be twisted, in which case just knit them through the back loop. These are not twisted, so I've been very good this time. And you can see here I've got rib. Oh, that was the stitch. Now, yeah, so remember I said that one stitch was green instead of blue, so that was the one where I'd unraveled one row. So what I do is I just put that stitch on my right needle, this twisted, and then I take the needle and put it under the blue yarn, and then I just lift that yarn, green yarn, over, and then I put it back. Okay, and then I'm going to just carry on knitting to the end and pick up a stitch at the end. I'm just checking to make sure I haven't made any other mistakes here. On the other sock there was like 2 stitches I think on this side that I'd accidentally missed, so I picked those up as I was doing this row. And then I'm going to pick up a stitch here. There we go. So now I've got 34 stitches on that side and I should have 32. So what I normally do is I knit the first one, knit 2 together, knit to the last 3 stitches, knit 2 together and knit 1 at the end. And then on this side I've got 33 stitches and I should have 32. So I either knit 1, knit 2 together at the beginning, or I do it at the end. It doesn't matter as long as you get down to 32 stitches, and then I can just carry on and finish my afterthought heel. And then at the end I've got 1 tail on that side, 2 on that side. I just weave those in, and I always check at the sides here to make sure I don't have any gaps, because if I do, I just use the end to tidy that up. So the pattern is my Adventures pattern, which is available on Ravelry and Payhip. It has a lot of extra information in it, so if you're new to knitting socks, it has extra information to help you. But I also have my Adventures sock knitting course, which shows you how to knit these socks. It shows you how to knit them from the toe up or from the top down. It shows you this wedge toe and a swirly toe, both toe up and top down. And it also shows you how to do this swirly heel and a wedge heel. So this swirly heel, you can do that as a heel or a toe, and the toe is toe up or top down. And then this wedge toe, you can do that as a toe or as a heel, and again toe up or top down. So it has all the cast-ons and cast-offs, and it has 2 stitch patterns, and I think there's something like 16 different options altogether. So I'll put the link to the pattern and to the course below. If you have any questions, just ask below this video, and I apologize for this not being my normal setup, and I hope that you can hear me okay. Thank you very much for watching.